the second section we're going to go over now is the trade-off analysis theme. And in this theme, we have 3 papers, and we'll start with the first one on the water. The first paper titled Toward Bridging the Water Gap in Texas, a Water Energy Food Nexus Approach. And here I'd like to also acknowledge co-authors on this paper, Sang-Yoon Lee, Vishafa, Koshit, John Blake, Mohamed Askaria, Hamid Shafiezadeh, Sonia Zamaripwa, and Rabia Mohtar. One of the main motivations for this case study and study that we did was the projected water gap by the Texas Water Development Board of 40% by 2070. So this is a projected water gap that will take different shapes and levels of urgency over different areas and different regions of Texas. So the challenge is a Texas-wide challenge, but it will emerge into different hotspots throughout the state. So one of the central questions that we were trying to address in this study was how could we bridge that water gap, given that we have population growth, which is a stressor, and given that we have different climate change stresses as well. And while doing that, we also need to account for the variability of water availability and the different growing water demanding sectors across different regions of the state. So the main objectives of our study were to spatially identify the competition of water resources allocation across different regions in Texas, again understanding the growing sectors and the demands they have over water resources, and develop appropriate tools for each of these hotspots that emerge in order to identify different interventions at a technological, policy, and social level that would help alleviate that water pressure or contribute to bridging that water gap in each of these hotspots. And the third is identify which of these interventions that we've identified are actually sustainable and we could prescribe moving forward. So, as I mentioned, the growth of these of the sectors of the agriculture sector, as well as the energy development in the state of Texas and the Eagle Ford Shale with the hydraulic fracturing, as well as the growing city of San Antonio, put pressures on water resources and on that interconnections between water, energy, and food, and emerges into hotspots in different places. So what we need to do is identify these hotspots, identify and quantify the interlinkages that exist between those interconnected systems, and evaluate the trade-offs associated with different interventions, so we could use those analytics that we developed to catalyze a dialogue between different stakeholders. So here, this is a map of Texas showing the 3 hotspots that we focused on in our study. The first was in Lubbock, in North Texas, which is a highly agricultural area with also a growing city. So in Lubbock, we have a competition between water and agricultural sectors, so municipal and agricultural sector. In San Antonio, the second hotspot, we have the city of San Antonio, which is one of the most rapidly growing cities in the U.S., as well as the neighboring Eagle Ford Shale, which also is one of the active hydraulic fracturing areas in the state, where we have that also competition that exists between the growing city, the growing energy development, and also neighboring agricultural activity next to the San Antonio region. So for each of these hotspots, we had different teams, sub-teams, who worked on developing tools that are appropriate for that hotspot, that help us evaluate different options that each of these local regions would be able to adopt in order to contribute to this bridging this water gap, to bridging that 40% water gap that we talked about. So in Lubbock, for example, we looked at different alternative agricultural practices. We looked at different energy alternatives. In San Antonio, we specifically looked at investing in low-impact development infrastructure. So we looked at rainwater harvesting and porous pavement as a way of improving the drainage and reducing runoff in the area. And in the Eagle Ford Shale, we also looked at different types of technologies that are used for hydraulic fracturing and how does that impact also pressures on the water system. So some of the results that we arrived at, so for in the interest of time, I won't be able to go through all of the tools that we developed for that, but I'll quickly give you a glimpse of some of the recommendations that we were able to arrive at given the analysis, the preliminary analysis that we did. So in Lubbock, we do encourage dry land agriculture, increase reliance on wastewater treatment for agriculture, investing in renewable energy, and all of these are alternatives that we do propose to push forward, but they do come at a price tag, and they do require financial investment to do. So, for example, in the case of Lubbock, we have the potential of bridging the water gap by 3 billion gallons, but at a price tag of $121 million, according to the analysis that we did. In the case of the San Antonio region, also the implementation of LIDs that I mentioned also could greatly contribute to bridging the water gap, but also comes at a very high price tag. So this is where we have this these analytics that we need to evaluate different trade-offs moving forward. Are we willing to invest this much money in these solutions, or are there other solutions that we want to look at? In the Eagle Ford Shale, we also realized that there's this additional competition over water with growing hydraulic fracturing over time, and even though there's a great advantage, economic advantage with hydraulic fracturing in Texas and for the counties that are in the Eagle Ford Shale, that benefit could change as we put more value on water and other natural resources in our assessment as well. So to wrap up quickly, solutions to the water challenges will not necessarily only come from within the water sector itself, and will not necessarily come with only water players. So bridging that gap requires multi-stakeholder approaches and requires that all sectors that are connected to the water system are also having their input into this process and into choosing alternatives. We need to account for the spatial and temporal distribution of resources because that also plays a big factor in what alternatives work and what does not. We need to account for the interconnections between the growing system and be able to develop analytics that properly communicate different trade-offs moving forward. Accompanied with these interventions, it's important to also have proper financing schemes that and within involved institutions that would end up proposing policies that are coherent and don't compete with one another across different sectors. Again, the challenge is a statewide challenge, and we need to be looking at it holistically, but when it comes to solutions, we need to look at more localized solutions and what works in the context of each of the regions. Thank you. So now we'll be moving to the next paper, which is about the hydraulic fracturing in San Antonio. And I believe John will be presenting. John, can you hear us?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hello. All right.
Good to hear from you, John.
You too, Dr. Mohtar. So yeah, I have the pleasure of presenting our paper titled Economic, Social, and Environmental Evaluation of Energy Development in the Eagle Ford Shale. Yeah, I'd like to set the background real quick in terms of we had 4 objectives that we wanted to look at when we began this study. We started off by wanting to get away from qualitative measurements and focus on how do we quantify the interrelations between the water, energy, and the transportation systems in the Eagle Ford Shale, which, if you're not familiar, it's in southern Texas, and it's one of the largest producing oil and gas shales in the nation. The second objective was to identify and quantify the consequences or the trackables that we could look at in terms of different scenarios of oil and gas production. We wanted to then develop a framework for the analysis, looking mostly at what consequences would it have for the economy and the society, and majorly how would the long-term sustainability of these sectors fare under these given scenarios. And lastly, we wanted to create an actual tool that someone could interact with and produce results based on either current conditions or projected conditions. So the method that we kind of took here was we had to identify what needs to go into this system in order to find what is the most sustainable scenario. And we found through research that there are two methods that can really drive this industry. One would be a price-based approach, where everything is connected to the market value of oil and gas. And then another approach would be to look at production. If either times are good or times are bad, or if there's something outside of the price that is driving the market, then you could just put in a percentage of change from the baseline condition in order to see what the changes in your output would be. And then the lateral length of your well and the amount of water you could actually reuse were the two major technologies that we found that had large impacts on this system. And so we found that there were 11 total outputs that are large triggers of showing the sustainability of a scenario. And we categorized these into three different trackables, one being environmental, social, and economic. Through this, we were able to produce a sort of index, a social, economic, environmental index, in which we could physically see the trade-offs that we're making. So if you're going to have a scenario that is very advantageous for the economy, you're going to have to make sacrifices in terms of environmental and social impacts. So the last point that the user could have a say in is being able to actually weigh what is more important for this given scenario. If there's a water shortage in the area, then maybe your water need trumps everything else, and you're able to weigh that heavier as the analysis goes along to figure out which is the most sustainable index, most sustainable scenario under these weighting factors. And so our results here, we took 5 example scenarios to get a better understanding of what drives the outputs here. We varied oil and gas price, the lateral length, and the water reuse, and we chose to use the price as the method to use because we really found that market value of oil and gas is really what drives production. And so, as you can see,
someone has the microphone. Could you please, except for John, everyone else, please mute your microphone.
You are doing in a bias way. You want to randomize the manipulation.
Okay, now everyone is muted, and I'll give the microphone to John. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vassal.
are we back?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So down at the bottom of this slide, I'll give you a minute to get back to it, Vassal. Perfect. At the bottom of this slide, we have the raw output of the tool. that is produced when you put in these 5 scenarios. And the overarching results that we saw was some of them were intuitive and we expected, and some of them were maybe not surprising, but reaffirmed what we thought we might see, but weren't sure until we started putting this all together holistically. So we found that oil production has both positive and negative in terms of if you increase your oil production, you're going to have a greater amount of employment and tax revenue for the state, but you're also going to have to deal with the emissions and the road deterioration, which is honestly an economic consequence to the residents of the specific counties. And then one thing we found that we expected was that the lateral length is going to directly impact how much water is being used per fracture, and that the price of oil is really the main driving factor of your oil and gas production, not necessarily natural gas. And so lastly, I'd like to go over kind of the key messages that we took from this. There are obvious and clear trade-offs associated with this energy development. And you can see that as you investigate different scenarios. This tool allows us to actually quantify these trade-offs, and it would kind of be a stepping stone to allow for dialogue and being able to put real numbers in front of people to get conversations going towards more productive solutions. And we also found that there is a growing need to further evaluate the relationship between all of these outputs and factors in terms of environmental and economic and social. And the goal would be, with tools such as this and other ones that could be developed, is to be able to create policies that are coherent, that are logical, and that are most advantageous for each different sector. And that is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. And now we'll move to Hamad Kulat. Hamad, are you online? Can you hear us?
Got unmuted.
Hamad?
Basil, there's a chat from Muhammad that he's having audio difficulty. I'd rather him present, otherwise we can just go through his slides, but let's give him a chance. Okay, I will try. This is Muhammad's research. Muhammad is in Turkey. He's back in Turkey. But this study is, in my mind, the significance of this study is that for the first time in the literature that I'm aware of, that we really quantify the economic benefit of looking into a nexus solution. The study is in Matagorda County. Matagorda is a neighborhood of Houston. It's one of the largest growing cities in the US. It has a major industry. It has, of course, it's close to Houston, so it has a lot of the oil industry spill over, but it has one of the largest nuclear power plant that uses a lot of water. So the trade-off there is between nuclear power, water partitioning, and the dwindling agriculture. So the study, kind of the background is how do we create incentives for the energy sector, electricity sector, which is in this case the nuclear, to work with agriculture, reinvest in agriculture, and we showed that there is really financial incentive. Next. Muhammad led the development of a comprehensive tool that really ties all of the water, energy, food in that region, and he did an exhaustive list of relationships that really quantify these, as you can see here in the analytical tool. And I would skip this and looking into some of the results that highlights of the results. Next. Really, the key elements of this study is that if you look at scenario 9, which seems to be the highest scenario in terms of the financial incentive while reducing the water footprint for the energy production, as well as including some of this water saving into reinvestment in agriculture, seems to be the most. So Mohammed did an exhaustive scenario building, and he did an optimization study. So the scenario 9, which seems to be the best sustainable scenario, is the one that has a conveyance structure system improvement, so investing in the infrastructure, an on-farm irrigation improvement, which increases the efficiency of water use on-farm, building new reservoir out of that saving that really reinvest again in agriculture, building water treatment for reuse, which is a significant element in that infrastructure that allows more water to be invested in, and looking at a solar farm. Other scenarios that seems to be also highlighted would be the scenario, which is again all of this best scenario out of the base scenario that is doing nothing. So the key message is there is an incentive. Today there was a discussion next door at the Metropolitan with a dialogue, say why would people want to really invest in the water and energy food nexus as a system? And really it's evident that there is a financial incentive. And the other incentive that we showed here is that also there is a resource saving incentive. So a nexus approach to managing these primary resources does save money. We also had a water and energy food nexus that are saved. It saves on the water demand. It reduces on the water footprint. Also, there is an environmental saving in reducing the carbon emission and the environmental flows. And we showed by number that really that scenario that has a system approach is superior in terms of the environmental, the social, and the economic. Sorry, Mohammed, you couldn't be with us. I hope you were hearing, and I hope I wasn't prepared, but I hope that I did justice to your research.
So with this, I think we'll move to the second Q&A session. We have 5 minutes. Are there any questions?
Basil, to my notes, we had Ahmed Mroui presenting now, correct? Or maybe I missed that.
We are done with the 3 presentations in this section, and now we have a Q&A session.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll start with the AUV crowd.
Thank you. I think so far this has been a very convincing argument for using the water energy food nexus tools to do that. My question is, from the experience, and I'm expecting, if I understood correctly, that there were multiple stakeholders involved in doing the research, so it was not only the scientists doing it. So weighing the politics versus, so the political factors versus the scientific evidence, how was the experience in the different hotspots and the different regions? Was did politics and political factors and interests of different stakeholders won over the scientific evidence, or was it the other way around? Which links to my second question on whether this is still at the stage of research and presenting the documents, or has there been an uptake of this and actually policies that are following some of these recommendations? So did this go to the next phase of doing something about the different scenarios?
Basil, I would like you to comment on the first part of the question. Did you hear the question?
Yes, yes. So specifically on the case study that was presented earlier on the Texas water gap, that was done on campus basically, and that was one of the initial stages of preliminary assessment that we used for later on engagement activities that we had possibly a year after we finished that case study. So that was one of several studies that focus on different angles of the nexus that's where the preliminary, that gave us a preliminary understanding of what are the hotspots, what are the issues that we want to focus on, and gave us some analytics that we could go with to the stakeholders and engage with later. And building on your question also on the different preferences and different interests between different players, whether in the energy, water, or food, definitely there is. Those resources do not exist in vacuum and are impacted by all of these preferences, and decisions that are made within these different resource systems are definitely impacted by that. And one of the studies that we'll not be able to show today, but we're currently working on, is looking at exactly what you asked about, looking at the convergence between what we have as academics were able to understand from the preliminary assessment that we had and the perspectives of the stakeholders on the ground. And that study is still ongoing, but we are finding so far a good level of convergence between what our guess of the issues were and what the interventions that could be possibly implemented in the regions are so far.
Thank you, Basil. Just very briefly, Dean White had mentioned something very, very critical, which is, have been any adoption to some of these policies? I think it's still too early. The jury is still out. There are a lot of appetite, though. There's a lot of appetite from policymakers at all levels, except for ours here. They're busy somewhere else. But there have been a lot of appetite on using a system approach to decision making. I think this has been, that the message has reached, but the discipline is still in its infancy. I think we can't expect to see evidence of adoption of technologies, adoption of policies, and I think we have the jury is still out, but I think the journey is on the right direction, engaging. One of the things that the Nexus has as a community has been very clear in engaging the stakeholders. I will give an example. The National Science Foundation in the U.S. had made it more of a mandatory for this specific program that they've created on Infuse innovations in the food, water, energy systems, mandatory to engage stakeholders for every project. And in fact, they are, unlike many other programs, they are engaging stakeholders early in the process. So I think we are on the right track, but it's still too early. Bassett, any quick questions from Texas?
Do we have any questions here? Do we have any questions online, perhaps?
I can't find any questions online, not at least in my small